So we have 65 Ayrshire cows on our farm. The reason why we have Ayrshire cows is because the farm is a hill farm in a relatively wet part of West Wales. And so Ayrshire cows, native breed cow, are fairly hardy animals and able to deal with the conditions much better, less prone to lameness. The quality of milk is excellent, but they don't produce much milk. They produce about 4,500 litres of milk a year each, compared to a sort of modern dairy animal where people would be looking for 10 or more thousand litres. We're using a Barber's starter culture called MT36. It's used in various other cheeses, Stichelton, Kirkham's. It's not traditionally seen as a Cheddar starter culture because it has a slower acidification, but we're using it because we're trying to emulate a recipe that was used at the turn of the century, which would have had a much longer make time, and so we are liking the properties of the slower, more gradual acidification. So we use a traditional animal's rennet. The rennet coagulates the milk. It's the enzyme from the calf, which is present in all mammals to coagulate milk. So we use it to form our junket, and we use approximately 20 ml per 100 litres of milk. So, for example, a vat full of milk will just take a cupful, and we just literally measure it out. We don't dilute it with water. We pour it in, and then we stir the milk for about 4 minutes. And after 4 minutes, we really want to stop the milk moving. It's very important to have the milk totally static at the coagulation point, which is the point at which the milk turns from a liquid to a semi-solid state. And that will happen after about, anything from 15 minutes. But traditionally, 4 minutes is the stirring period, and then we'll stop the stirring and try and make sure that the milk is completely still by the coagulation point. What we found using Gold Starter is that we get a much better set, and we were looking at having a softer set, more in line with the kind of European mountain cheeses, but actually we are looking for quite a firm set with this cheese, and I think kind of Dora Saker talks about getting a good, junket before you cut. But because we've got acidity going on, we get a much better set. We really struggled to get a good set with the DBI just because it wasn't doing much in this phase of the make. Okay, so we've cut the curd. There are a few things that we're looking for when we're cutting the curd. Most importantly probably is to try and get an evener cut as possible. It's quite challenging if you're cutting curds to a relatively large size with automated knives, because in order to get the larger pieces you often end up with quite a few smaller pieces. But we want a nice even curd size. We're going for a kind of a plump pea size, kind of average size. But another indicator for me of when I think I've cut enough is that the curds do begin to settle, so the knives will still be going around, but you'll just see more weight on the surface. And that's time to stop the cutting and put the paddles on. And they're basically springing apart nicely. And the acidity, the pH now is about 6.05. So we've got good acidification, but the curds at this stage have they feel more plump than they would with a DBI make. With a DBI make, they kind of feel drier and less moist in a way, but they don't feel wet, they just feel fuller. So it's quite interesting. They feel like polystyrene a little bit. It's quite interesting. But once we've got to a point where we feel the curds are acidic enough and cooked enough, we'll weigh off, where we let all the curds. We'll pitch, where we'll let all the curds settle to the bottom of the vat, and then we'll weigh off, basically take out all the whey, drain it through a sieve, leaving a mat of the curds at the bottom of the vat. it's about 10% of what you start with in volume. So it's for 1,000 litres of milk, we'll end up with about 100 kilos of curd at the bottom of the mat, at the bottom of the vat. We'll then cut that circular mat of curd into a block, a big sort of square at the bottom of that, and then smaller squares that we will then remove from the vat onto the cooling table and layer these blocks between cotton muslin cloth and stack them progressively higher. And this is cheddaring. We do this over a period of 2 to 2.5 hours, starting at stacks of 3 high, then 6 high, and then 12 high. And the curds will change from a kind of a fairly brittle, crumbly texture to a kind of, before milling, we want them to have a kind of nice oily kind of chamois cloth texture. So they really do form themselves over this period. And they'll have a kind of a grain to them. So when you tear them, you'll see that there are lots of kind of grains within the curd, very much like cooked chicken breast. It's not like making cheese with a DVI starter where you have to kind of rush to get the salt on to kind of halt the acidification. This will just kind of mellow out at the end of its cheddaring process, at which point we'll mill the curd, where we literally take the sheets of curd and feed them into the peg mill, which will tear them apart, giving them quite a rough texture. And once we've milled all the curd, we'll add 2% salt to the curds and give it a really good stir in. The curd should be really dry at this stage. There should be no moisture coming off them at all. Again, that's very different from the DVI make, where there's quite a lot of moisture coming off the cooling table. These will be completely dry at this stage. We'll then load the curds into the moulds. The moulds are lined with a cloth to help allow moisture to wick away during the pressing. And we'll fill the moulds as full as we possibly can. We like to have the cheeses at about 11 kilos at press, which will give us a finished cheese around the 10 kilo mark once it's come through the store. And then we'll put them into our gang press, where they're all laid in series with the bottom of a mould going into the top of the next mould. And then we'll apply, first of all, quite a low pressure just to gradually form the cheeses together, and then gradually increase this over an hour. And once we've got to about 1.5 bar, we'll remove all the cheeses from the press, empty them from the moulds, turn them over, and then put them back into the press to kind of seal up the both ends of them, and then turn the pressure up to about 4 bar, and they'll stay in there for 36 hours. The interesting thing about this new recipe that we're following is that we don't really have a clear idea of where it's going to lead in terms of the flavour profile or the texture of the cheese, but we're kind of really aware that each stage of the making process seems to be so right. There's a kind of intuitive nature about it, where the structure seems really, stable all along the way. It follows its own pace. You don't have to really intervene to steer it by heating it, to sort of the higher temperatures or getting the salt on at a particular point. And that seems to be bearing out in the finished cheese. We're having we're on the journey with it, and we don't quite know where it's going to go, but we are finding that the cheese is fantastically flavoursome from even after 2 months in the store. And it's very different from the DVI cheese, and it's very exciting. And what it will be like after a year, we don't know, but we're pretty sure it'll be pretty good.